Greetings, everyone. I am Dave Gruber, a principal analyst with the Enterprise Strategy Group, and today we're going to be talking about detection and response, one of the critical cybersecurity strategies that have become very prevalent and really a core foundational element of modern cybersecurity programs. Today, joining me in this conversation is Patrick Joyce. He's the Vice President of Product Portfolio Management at DeepSeas. Patrick, say hello to our audience and please tell us just, if you can, a little bit about who DeepSeas is so we all have some context.
Thanks, Dave. DeepSeas is a technology-forward cybersecurity services firm, and we help organizations build and transform cybersecurity programs. We have three core capability areas: managed detection and response, strategic CISO advisory, and also offensive security services. And our customers really appreciate the fact that we can build end-to-end programs, bringing skills from each of these areas together. So excited to be here today and talk more about detection and response.
Well, let's set some context first. As an industry analyst, I do a tremendous amount of primary research. So I'm going to pull some stats and some data from some of the more recent research projects I've completed. I'll start out by saying that after many, many years, we continually see organizations struggle with the function of security operations. And if you're a security leader, whether you have a high functioning security operations team in place today and well-oiled machine, or whether you're just building one from scratch, these challenges likely resonate with you in both cases. And that is that the attack surface that we are all supporting and securing is in motion constantly. It's growing, it's changing. And of course, we're challenged with securing this environment that's in a high state of change. The threats that are coming at us, of course, are constantly changing too, and that's on all of us. That's not new. It's just something that we all need to keep up with, and so we look for tools and help on how to do that. The use of cloud applications, technologies, services, data, resources, AI infrastructure, all of these things make our environment more challenging for us to secure. Again, part of that is understanding the attack surface and the makeup of that and the type of threats that are there. And then we all often struggle with the number of security tools that we have in play. And I have a whole perspective on that I'll share in a little bit. And maybe the last thing, which is the hardest thing to really get out from under, which is we're all in a firefight constantly because of the intensity of the environment that we all live within. Sometimes we feel like we're in such a firefight, we don't have time to step back and focus on improving the program itself. So there's a bunch of sort of drill down challenges and things that came out of that research. But to sort of set context to the world that we're all living in here when it comes to security strategies, I created this relatively simple model that I call the threat funnel. And let me just introduce it here briefly. And that is that as security leaders, we need to implement security strategies. We often talk about it as layered security controls, but this is a little bit of a different model where we think about things in terms of both proactive security controls and then reactive security controls. And so this is laid out in sort of five basic pieces. The first one being, well, let's make the attack surface as small as possible, so we're having to defend less and work with less effort on defending it. The second layer is around active security controls, and these are the everyday security controls that we all have deployed and implemented, and much that we complain about having siloed mechanisms in place. And so those are sort of the two big categories on the proactive side. And then on the reactive side of the equation, we have, because we can't stop everything, right? We have a threat detection and response layer, which we'll be talking about today, and then an incident response process that, when things go south, how do we respond to that? And then for those few things that actually cause real damage, how do we recover from those situations? All of these align closely to the NIST framework. And so there's lots of drill down in those parts. Today, we're going to be focusing in on this part. It's the reactive side of the equation. We often reference this as the security operations function, although security operations is evolving to expand to do more proactive kinds of things. And all my little cryptic stick figures on the left side denotes that there's often a human-intensive function within our teams. So the security operations function consumes often many people because it's a daily grind, where we're keeping up with alerts and we have to process those and determine where we should focus, and thus the setup for the equation. Patrick, you when you set up who DeepSeas was, you're actually involved in many aspects of all of these security strategies, and as a partner to many companies, you go in and I know you do assessments and other things to take a look at the whole picture here. And while we're only talking about sort of the reactive side today, how does this funnel resonate with you when it comes to thinking about all the capabilities that you bring to bear?
I sincerely, I really like this model. I think there's a few things that appreciate about it. One, I mean, just recognizing that where you can get the most ROI on your security investment in your program, because every resource, every program is resource constrained. So you think about even early on, attack surface reduction and basic IT security hygiene, super important, because you really do want to reduce the attack surface. You didn't mention threat intelligence, but you have it referenced here. Using intelligence to prioritize what you do at each one of these layers, also paramount in the process, because security, unlike some other aspects of IT management, security is super dynamic because the threat actor is always changing, they're persistent, and they're looking for the next best approach to infiltrate your systems. And having intelligence plus a strong risk management program to help you figure out where do you put your attention is incredibly helpful. And the last thing I'll mention is, I view each of these layers as a process, and they build upon each other and they feed each other. So what you learn during detection and response is also going to help you better improve your attack surface reduction and active security controls down the road. But yeah, really helpful. Yeah, I like this.
Yeah, like people have often said to me, "Hey, I often think about this as more as a circular process because of actually what you just said, where
Yeah.
things feed each other." I chose to use the funnel metaphor very, very specifically, though, because there's so many threats that if we can reduce them as they go down the funnel, then it reduces the amount of effort. And sometimes so I think like our objective here is to get as much of the threat landscape taken care of up front early in the funnel here, and then we spend less effort lower in the funnel on reactive for two reasons. One is less damage occurs, so the more we can prevent up front, the more we can stop from entering our organization, for advancing through the attack chain, the less damage we do. But then also from a resource standpoint, we can spend fewer resources on the reactive agenda if we do a better job during the proactive agenda. So I continually promote sort of putting the threat funnel on a diet.
I think the funnel is great. And one other thing I'll note is sometimes you don't have the luxury as a risk leader to start at the top. You may need to jump right into detection and response. And we're often, as we're helping organizations, we may rapidly launch a detection and response program. We can do that very quickly. But as we run it, our goal is to continue to feed back into those higher layers. So we're finding opportunities to reduce attack surface, to implement more proactive controls so that you're not, if you just have detection and response and not those other layers, you have a very expensive program.
Yeah, and you're chasing your tail for a long period of time. But I'm glad you brought that up, though, because so many like early stage, very immature security programs, you really need to focus on the reactive side first, get it at least some basic infrastructure and controls in place, and then you start to spend as you back up. So, okay, let's get into it. Let's talk about threat detection and response. Now, I'm going to start with a conversation around endpoint detection and response. And in fact, we'll use endpoint detection and response as sort of the poster child for detection and response, because many of the tools, the techniques, the processes, and things that have evolved over the last, it's been a while now, like 7 to 8 years, where detection and response has been a mainstream part of security strategies, started in the endpoint arena. I worked for the initial innovator who created endpoint detection and response, or sort of the whole idea of it, way back when, company called Carbon Black in the early days. And their original notion was a couple of guys who had worked on the national security side of the equation and recognized that it was very difficult to go out and figure out what threat actors were doing without being able to look back and seeing what they actually, what activities they actually utilized in the process. So the initial idea was to simply be able to capture events and activities that were taking place on the endpoint. And they, I remember talking to these guys in the early days. It's like, why endpoint? Why not network? Why not some other part of the infrastructure? And it was because most attacks at that time, their objective was to get to the endpoint because that's where the data was, that's where critical processing was. So we wanted to be able to start there because that was sort of the end of the road in the attack chain. Of course, more advanced attacks have changed that now. Things are more complex. They involve multiple threat vectors, which is why we now have technologies like XDR, which is sort of at the top of this chart. But so things evolved, starting out with just a basic backtrack of, can I see what was happening? And there wasn't really much detection involved. It was more about forensics. And then EDR 1.1 sort of happened early days, and we started to apply threat intelligence to that, and just at a sort of a really basic level, which was, hey, if we know that a threat looks like X and we saw X activity happening on an endpoint, then that allowed us to be able to say, okay, there was an attack happening there, or at least potentially some suspicious or malicious activity that was happening. And then immediately, sort of as soon as people could start to see what was happening, of course, we wanted to be able to take action and do something about it. So I called that EDR 1.2. And that's when we began to add response or remediation options to that. And then we further advanced that to add more ability to reach back into those endpoints and pull additional forensics data. So it wasn't just the telemetry that got sent up initially, but we could go back and ask for more. And then as EDR 2.0 started to happen, we added automation to the process. So we could have automated detection and automated response functions and operations that were happening. So that was sort of that basic evolution. And then where we are today, let me fast forward a few years here. So today, most all of the EDR solutions have evolved to become something that is commonly referred to as XDR. And I think the industry term, when I first started using this term, I called it cross controls detection and response, but the industry accepted term is extended detection and response. And what we've done here is we've gone beyond endpoint, and right, so now we have detection and response programs and systems that are able to pull in information across endpoint, network, cloud, identity, and all various threat vectors. And so we have, because we have more advanced and complex threats, we needed mechanisms to be able to do that. I'm going to pause there and go over to you, Patrick. Now, while all this is happening, organizations are struggling with keeping up with this process. And the advent of managed detection and response services was born. And it was initially on top of EDR specifically. It wasn't on top of XDR, although there were managed network detection and response services that became readily available too. Take us back to the early days of MDR.
Yeah, I mean, another good visual. There's a lot of information here to unpack, but originally, in the Security Operations Center, defenders in the world of EDR 1.0, it was almost, a threat hunt driven approach. And, it was a lot of searching and looking for the threat. And oftentimes it was after you had an initial trigger, you had a reason to go search, or you had some information. And then, when you look at Intel, one of the great things that modern EDR technologies have done today is, one, embed a lot of intelligence. And when we talk about intelligence in a product, we're really talking about capabilities to detect known bad behaviors or known bad, signatures of files or processes. So having Intel embedded into these EDR tools, super, super helpful, super powerful, but even better, most of the leading EDRs now allow us to push our own Intel into the product, because every organization is unique. They have their own risks, and you can customize specific Intel for an organization, personalize it for that organization's business and telemetry and network, and it allows for much more precision in detection. Now that requires a little bit more skill to go beyond just the standard out of the box Intel, but it's an important feature that we look for, as we're partnering and helping to select an EDR technology for an organization. Custom forensics, super helpful still, to pull back intel and take the investigation further. It also allows us to take threat hunting much further than we could before. So that function, the ability to search through lower fidelity data signals, is still incredibly important to the cyber defender. Being able to find threats that are lurking below the surface, maybe slow attacks that are being unfolded over a long period of time. It's an incredible feature. And then to your point, Dave, we now have this world of XDR where many of the vendors that previously branded themselves as just simply an endpoint detection and response solution have added extended visibility. And most often you see identity as a key feature of an XDR stack. Also cloud, because in a cloud environment, you don't always have an endpoint. You may not be able to access things that are underneath the app that you bought. So you've got these different capabilities to get more telemetry into the platform. And it's super helpful, and it helps us extend. So we just have better visibility and better understanding of what's happening outside of just simply the endpoint. Vulnerabilities are another aspect of XDR that's been interesting. Many of the leading EDR vendors are starting to bring in vulnerability data, so you can start to understand some of that attack surface risk that we talked about earlier in the funnel. And I'll just close by saying, out of the box, most of the modern EDRs can be very approachable, easy to get started with, but there's a bunch of advanced features that are under the surface that you can apply to your organization to really close the gap and personalize the detection response program to your business.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about this maturing process over time is that in the early days, these types of solutions required some pretty advanced security skills. And I remember in the early days of pushing these technologies, the challenge was just that. And we ran programs to help people how to become threat hunters, to your point earlier, because people needed fairly advanced skills. Modern EDR systems, modern XDR systems do a lot of the work for you, right? A lot of those capabilities and things are automated. So this technology is much more approachable to lesser skilled organizations. But to your point, at the same time, the threat landscapes become much more complex and much more advanced. And so we still have the need for more advanced capabilities, more advanced skills that have sort of followed suit with the threat landscape itself.
And Dave, there are just two examples that I'll share that I think help make this point that I've observed in the last year. One, I'll tell a little bit of a story. Last year, there was a new type of malware, or is actually a attacker toolkit that many of the threat actors were using. It's called EDR kill shifter. Basically, the bad guys figured out a way to run a process that could deactivate some of the modern EDRs, and it was it created a pretty big risk for any organization that simply had EDR and didn't have compensating controls. For organizations that we were supporting, and organizations that had advanced intel teams, the defenders were able to quickly build new detections and push those detections into their EDRs, while the vendors were still, seeking to keep up. And, oftentimes you've got, hours, minutes, days to close that gap, and having a sophisticated intel team and a detection engineering team can really help. So that's one example where we were able to, close that gap, kill shifter. The other thing I'll mention is your tools are only as good as their level of deployment. And oftentimes, we'll see organizations that have 95% deployment, but maybe not necessarily a process to audit and ensure that they've got full coverage of their detection tools. So I'll just emphasize that having process and having persistence to that process and that team is also really important. As we mentioned before, security is unfortunately not a set it and forget it type of sport. And we got to think about people and process as we roll these types of technologies out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many organizations that I talk to that own these tools and are still struggling with their program, and I see those teams go through their own understanding, adoption process, maturity process of building out a highly functional security operations program itself. And you're right, the people part of it is a big piece, and one that often involves organizations like yours for some help. I just wanted to recap like some of the fundamentals. So when we think about just the sort of core concepts around detection and response, and again, while we're talking about EDR, these functions are really the core functions within all DR functions, all detection and response technologies and solutions. Oftentimes I refer to that as star DR. But there's some level of sensor or agent that's able to capture the security signals and telemetry. So that's sort of the uplink from these mechanisms. And then, but those same sensors and agents often enable response actions to take place for those things that will allow you to contain or take intervention or to remediate something that's happening on an asset or a device or a workload or a network device. And the second piece of this, which you sort of think of not very much, which is the transport. These all of these sensors and agents creates a massive amount of security telemetry, and while we all understand that at the end of the day we end up with big security data repositories, the transport of that was a big problem to solve in the early days. To be able to push all this security data up, and the staggering amounts of data get sent daily. What should be stored? What are the signals? What metadata should be stored or captured of all that process? And then, sort of once it gets centralized, a scalable data lake, we were able to aggregate, correlate, and then eventually apply a more intelligent analytics engine on top of all that data, and apply the threat intelligence resources that we have to be able to determine, detect threats, and understand them. The fifth component is around tooling, and that's the tooling that helps your security analysts themselves triage, understand enough to investigate, and which is a bit of a loop in itself, and then enable analysts to prioritize and respond to those things. And then, so therefore the next function is about what response mechanisms are available to contain and stop threats. And it's sort of interesting, as new technology hits us, AI infrastructure is sort of the latest wave of net new tech that we need to provide detection and response capabilities for. And there's a little hierarchy of these elements that typically takes place, where we start to first be able to see and monitor what's happening there, but we have limited ability to respond to those actions. So as new threat vectors appear, it took us a long time, by the way, to get access to cloud and be able to respond appropriately to cloud threats. So things, as new tech shows up on our doorstep, we need new response mechanisms to contain and stop threats. And then finally, as an overlay, workflow, right? To be able to support team environments, to be able to escalate, to be able to bring other team members into to the threat environment too. So Patrick, as you provide this capability called managed detection and response capabilities, as you think about staffing, and because I know you work with organizations, some that have very immature security programs, some that have very mature security programs. As you think about these fundamental capabilities, tell me just for a minute about, like, when you go in and you assess the environment, and you sit down with your clients, what is that conversation like for a sort of more early stage security developed program, less mature program, versus somebody who has a highly functional and operationalized security operations function who's also asked you to participate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'll start by saying that we seek to meet, our client counterparts on where they are in the journey, and we initially want to understand what resources our clients have Do they have security professionals that they seek to be delivering alongside of us in a co-delivery model? Are they seeking to have us as a partner take the entire security problem off their plate, which we can do in a large part? And I think the other aspect of the getting started process is going through each of these capabilities that you have listed here, and thinking about the people, process, and technology aspects. And just, a couple of pro tips, whether you're working with a partner like DeepSeas or not, as you think about these things, sensors and agents, I mentioned this earlier. Do you have a mechanism to ensure that you've got full deployment? You often have to consider creating specific policies for different categories of devices that you are going to integrate with. And we spend time with our customers building those policies, making sure and testing and validating that we have a comprehensive deployment, so we have full visibility. You talked a bit about telemetry and all the great telemetry that's produced, and many organizations think, let me shove this all in a data lake. We believe that it's really important to push cyber intelligence as close to the control and as close to the threat event as possible. So part of our method is we enable, what can be described as detection as code, where we integrate with the tools, including EDR, and we begin pushing intelligence detections into the tools. So we're one, being as efficient as we can with data and as quickly as we can. But there are low fidelity, data, alerts and information that we will pull back into a data lake so that we can run our hunt processes. So setting up, those integrations and establishing the right policies and behaviors are important. And then as you go a little bit further down, into all these great features that we have now to respond, so we can respond quickly using these technologies. We can automate response, but it's really important that we have a process, that we have an IR plan that both our client team understands and participates in, and our defenders know how to operate. So we'll build a run book together that again includes lines of business, that includes key personnel, and we'll make decisions about how we respond in different aspects of the network. So all those components get us started, and then as we move down the road together, we're seeking to constantly transform the program. We know that our clients' businesses are always changing. As security professionals, we serve the business to enable the business to succeed. And we partner with our clients to continue to look at what's happening next on the roadmap, to evolve, continue to work that funnel that you described, because they are each an ongoing process, and just really seek continuous improvement and evolution.
So that feels to me like a pretty close partnership between what I would call a pretty individualized set of needs and capabilities, and I say that because there's a whole lot of MDR providers in the industry, a whole lot of security service providers. Some that if you drew a spectrum, some that would say, I love everything you do as long as you do it my way. That it's like, as a security organization, you need to fit into their security models and their tooling and their set of processes and things. You just described something that feels more personalized, more tailored to the environment that's there. Am I off in what I just heard there?
Security is a contact sport. We take security very personally, and we work closely with our customers as a services organization that's technology enabled, to ensure that we're building a program that is personalized is the right term, but configured to really address the risk that organization has. There are a spectrum of providers out there that operate under the MDR banner, which I apologize to anyone out there that's seeking to buy or consume an MDR service provider, because not all are built the same. Our program specifically focuses on operating as an extension of the organization's team, and working through those really important process details. There's value in being rigid where it makes sense to enable scale and enable value for all organizations that are subscribed to our service. But we can't succeed if we're not deeply embedded into an organization's business processes, and that's what we strive to do.
Yeah, great, great. And can I ask you one additional question, which is about responsibility?
Mm.
So when you engage with the service provider, who's responsible for the security outcomes? Sometimes we talk about these as service level agreements, but more importantly, the actual outcomes associated with these activities. How do you talk to your customers about the idea of shared responsibility, in that, of course, they're responsible for their infrastructure and ultimately they own their security program. So all of our listeners, you own it
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right? But so when someone engages you, you're a service provider. How do you think about responsibility for outcomes?
Yeah, it's I mean, you mentioned the term shared responsibility, and that's language that we're typically using. Ultimately, the owner of risk for the business is someone who works, for that business, right? There is, every organization has their own compliance requirements, and their own risk appetite, and that is owned, by the organization from an accountability perspective. But from a responsibility perspective, when you work with a service provider like DeepSeas, we're taking on aspects of that responsibility, and we lay out a RACI model that describes what we do, what our customers do. We implement a run book that describes where the handoffs are, and it's really important to understand, as someone who may be watching this and you're going to be consuming a service, to understand exactly where your provider is going to hand the baton off to you, how the process will work fully. And if you were to work with DeepSeas, you'd go through a process where we walk through a run book, we test those processes, and we continue to mature them over time, because many organizations will grow and they may hire security personnel after bringing on a security provider, and we may make changes to that run book. But continuing to revisit the nuances of the shared responsibility model, it's an important part of the relationship.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for explaining that. I'm going to bring back a little bit of research data here. So when it comes to getting help from MDR providers, this question in my survey was about where are you utilizing, or what were the motivations for you to engage with the service provider. And interestingly, at the top of the list, it was at least things began with security assessments to determine, hey, how robust is my security program? Where do I have gaps? Where do I have weaknesses in my security program? And by the way, I did cut the data here by larger organizations, 1,000 employees and up, and under 1,000 here too, which is denoted in the lighter blue category, just to show you that there's a little bit of difference. Threat intelligence you brought up several times, which is a really critical part of the function, and one that often people don't have those capabilities in-house, and so often reach out to third parties for help. You also brought up vulnerability assessment and management, the whole risk agenda, reducing the attack surface. So that is also an area where people regularly need help. And even the people that I speak with that have the best vuln management programs still tell me they're not very good. And so this is like a very important area for people to focus on, again, to reduce sort of the funnel shape there. The part we're talking about today, incident response, incident detection, incident recovery, and remediation, that's sort of that middle blue box there, is certainly a high item. But note that it wasn't at the top of the list. It wasn't outsourcing that function wasn't necessarily while a big part of the equation, wasn't at the top of the use list. And then sort of continues on beyond that into more IR type activities to crisis preparedness and things. Anyway, I color coded these in red, blue, and purple a little bit to show that the groupings here. And I think you spoke of, you do all of these things that are on this list. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, a couple observations. One, we've been practicing, security for, as a unified business for about 20 years. We rebranded a couple of years as DeepSeas, and it's very important to us that we're able to bring an end-to-end security program and an end-to-end portfolio to our customers, because what we've seen over the years being in the industry is that it can be really challenging when, there are gaps in services. Like if you bought, an MDR service, that MDR service makes recommendations for attack surface management, and then tells you, "Good luck. We can't help you go any further. Go find another provider." That can be frustrating. You almost become a general contractor where you need to find all these different security providers when you only work with niche vendors. So that was one. Just being able to support this full spectrum was important. The other observation I have, just looking at this list in the order, I've found that, in organizations that I've supported, the things on the top are also um, early adoption, capabilities. So you should start with an assessment early, and that's a good way to get started. But as you mature your program, and as we mature programs with customers, you get deeper into the list, and we start to bring in like more advanced threat hunting, for example, or the thing that you've at the very bottom, breach and attack simulation. Many viewers may not even know what that is. It's a relatively new capability that, I just participated in a breach attack simulation for one of our more mature customers a couple weeks ago, where we go in and we run very targeted, simulated attacks against detection telemetry and detection processes. And in this case, we were able to identify gaps in detections that were very specific to that organization, that only would exist in that organization. And we were able to bring our intel and our detection engineering team in to build new personalized signatures just for that program. So again, it's a more mature activity. So I'm just curious, if this data is also, just demonstrating where organizations are.
Yeah, and so your point is well taken. There it is. And if you look at it, I have another diagram that I often use, which is a security maturity pyramid, and you think about just the notion that there are more less mature organizations in the world than there are more mature from a security program perspective. And so the numbers sometimes reflect that, because when we do surveys, we survey all aspects of security maturity. And your point is well taken. Some of these are the more mature security program people who have really solid programs in many of these other areas and are now spending focus and budget on these more advanced type of program offerings. And so I'll ask you back, which is as you work together with organizations to mature their programs. And one of the things I hear regularly is I had a very immature security program. I engaged a high quality service provider like DeepSeas, and very quickly we made a dramatic advancement in our security maturity. But people always have headroom to go, and over a period of longer term engagements of 2, 3, 4, 5 years, people continue to advance their maturity and do more, much through the advice of leaders like yours, who go in and help people push and grow and strengthen their programs. When you're engaged over time, I don't know what the average time of your engagement is, but when you think about, I don't know, year 1 versus year 2 versus year 3, do you find yourself working together to fundamentally do different things?
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. And organizations often start, there's different entry points into the journey. So that's, and there's oftentimes a different trigger, and maybe even a different motivation for transformation. But I would say, if you think about a 3 to 5 year process, we're often starting with just establishing all the layers of that funnel that you described, and depending on where we enter, we're seeking to drive, a comprehensive program. Once you get to a strong level of visibility and capability, you start to get into continuous improvement mode, where you're using risk-based decision making and threat intelligence to drive more surgical results, and you start to introduce things like threat hunting, more targeted threat hunting for adversaries that are targeting that organization, more specific attack simulations to, again, just try to really zero in the quality of the capabilities. And the other thing to note is that sometimes technology vendors change, right? So vendor capabilities rise and fall, depending on different shifts that are happening in the market. So as a vendor agnostic provider, sometimes we re-platform along the journey, or we bring in new technologies because the business moves into a new space. Maybe they open new manufacturing plants and they need to monitor OT devices. Like, we'll go in and extend visibility of the SOC into those areas. So we like to say that if we're not growing, we're dying in a lot of ways, and we're constantly seeking to mature with our customers throughout the journey.
Yeah, great. And let me bring up one other hot topic that gets talked about a lot these days, and we haven't. I think maybe I mentioned AI once early on, and because many organizations are struggling to keep up with the advancement of the adoption of AI capabilities within their operating functions. Are you getting a lot of demand where people are asking for help now to come in and say, help me keep up, help me understand what I need to do to secure my AI operating infrastructure and govern the use of AI?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's talking about AI, right? I think we can all recognize that. And as a provider and a practitioner, there's kind of two aspects of the effort. There's one, how can AI better enable us as security professionals to scale, the work that we do? And then second, and I'm hearing more of this right now, how do I ready the business to adopt AI across all areas and functions in a secure way, in a trusted way? Because certainly, I think we can all agree, as security professionals, we're just not going to turn off the AI spigot. So we've developed a point of view, and maybe this will be our next webinar, Dave. But we've developed a point of view on a secure AI journey, and again, kind of reflective of what you have here. We start with assessment and visibility, and our point of view on assessment is we want to understand your readiness, your process, your risk appetite, but we also want to help organizations understand where is AI being used in your organization. So we'll come in and bring some technical capabilities to help just get some visibility. And then we start to make decisions on what appropriate use is and where we go from there. From a detection and response perspective, we have our own platform that unifies the different detection tools that are in an organization and pushes out detection as code. As we mentioned, we call it our vision platform. And we've invested heavily over the past 24 months, and will continue to bring more automation and more AI capabilities into the platform, which is helping us bring more scale, take response further, bring more depth to the recommendations and analysis that we provide, and also extend hunt. As our actors are using AI to launch new attacks, as defenders, we're using it, to really scale our defenses as well.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for that. I did just want to touch on that before we got done, and we should do something else for our listeners so we can drill into that further. So as we think about the process, we've talked about a lot here. Sometimes maybe so much so it seems like a daunting process. There's a whole lot going on, but the truth is getting started and shoring up your detection and response program doesn't have to be a complicated process. It's one that I know that you and other service providers like you can come in and get people at the ready fairly quickly, assess the situation about what people have today, and help people optimize and leverage existing investments that they already have in place. And you brought that up, right? So many people have tools they've invested in. Either they're not configured properly, they're not covering the right parts of the infrastructure, their detections aren't optimized to be able to detect the kinds of attacks that are happening that are there. So your ability to align those tools and processes to business and risk objectives, important part of the equation. And I'm so glad that you brought that up earlier. To configure and optimize the existing tools, but then also supplement them where needed. And I know you regularly parachute in capabilities that close gaps in the organization or help people strengthen what's there. And on a process and people front, one of the great things about dealing with experts like DeepSeas is that these are highly refined processes, and you have a set of people that you can customize and drop in to help people, but then also well-oiled machine on your own to drive the operations of it too. When it comes to your own team, if you're listening to this, you likely have resources that are either already doing some part of this work today, or you're working with some other provider that's assisting. But you're able to grow your own teams, visibility, understanding, skills, and knowledge about this process. And one of the other, I didn't bring the survey stats with me, but one of the surprise pieces of dealing with managed detection and response providers is people's own resources get way better. They advance their skills, they understand the process, their own ability to participate in this function gets strengthened tremendously. And so you're growing your own team's capabilities, and at the same time getting help in all these other areas too. And then finally, you have a more effective means of measuring and communicating what's actually happening in your organization. And so when you think about the context around security posture and do I understand what's happening, and do I have visibility and transparency into all that, you guys make that possible for folks too. And again, my understanding from the so many people that I talk to that are utilizing these capabilities is all this happens pretty quickly from the time of initial engagement to the time when people are really recognizing value.
Yeah, I mean that's the advantage of stepping into an existing mature shared service program that DeepSeas offers is you can go from zero to significant maturity very quickly in specific areas because it's established. The value again of this collective defense. We're defending over 1,000 organizations. We're learning in every one of those different enterprises about what the threat actors are doing, and we're synthesizing that intelligence and pushing it back out to everybody. That's a really difficult thing to do on your own, truly. And I think lots of different organizations have measured the value of different types of security investments that you can make, and at this point, it's almost undeniable the value of investing in a managed detection and response service at some level. I mean, it's hard to do it on your own, and having a persistent team that it's all they do, it's all they focus on, is a ton of value. So and we'll talk more about DeepSeas in a minute, but we're always excited to help and have a conversation to help somebody get started along the journey. And we make it pretty painless, I would say, as you get started.
Yeah, and it's so that this is an entrenched strategy for most organizations, whether you're little, big, whether you're mature program, an immature program. My research says that close to 90% of organizations either already are working together with some type of managed service provider, or have plans to do so in the next 12 to 18 months. And just a note about that, so many of the security leaders I talk to tell me that they've engaged with an organization like yours for not their entire attack surface, for not their entire business. They've engaged because they have a particular segment of the business that needs help. They have a particular function within the business that needs extra attention. They have a specific set of gaps, could be coverage gaps, could be skills gaps because they're struggling to secure their cloud environment or maybe their AI environment because it's new. So it's not a all or nothing game here when it comes to thinking about everything that we've just talked about. There's incremental value, and you can sort of aim these types of services at particular pain points that you have.
Yeah, we see a lot of organizations that have acquisitions that maybe they're adding a big, a big entity into their organization, and they want to make sure it's shored up, before officially docking. That's a pretty common use case we see as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Well, tell us where people can find out more about DeepSeas.
Yeah. So go ahead if you're interested. Use your smartphone, scan that QR code, or you can visit us at deepseas.com and request a quote or request a just a meeting. And happy to talk about your program, talk more about the what Dave and I were covering today, and help you along your journey. So it's a complex world. Threat actors are tireless, and security is all we do. So give us a call, send us a message through our website, and we'll connect.
Awesome. Awesome, Patrick. It's been a pleasure chatting today. Thank you, everyone who's joined us here, for your time and attention.
Appreciate it. Thanks.